Jean Valjean listened. Not a sound. He pushed the door. He pushed it lightly with the tip of his finger, with a cat's stealthy, timorous care. The door yielded to the pressure with a silent, imperceptible movement, widening the opening slightly. He waited a moment, then pushed the door again more firmly. It yielded gradually and silently. The opening was now wide enough for him to pass through, but there was a small table beside the door, creating a troublesome angle that blocked the entrance. Jean Valjean saw the obstacle. At any risk, the opening had to be widened. He made up his mind and gave the door a third push, harder than before. This time a poorly oiled hinge suddenly let out a harsh and prolonged creak into the darkness. Jean Valjean trembled. The noise sounded in his ears as clear and terrible as the last trumpet on Judgment Day. In the fantastic exaggeration of this instant, he almost imagined that the hinge had become animate and suddenly endowed with a terrible life, that was barking like a dog to awaken all sleepers. He stopped, shuddering, bewildered, and dropped from his tiptoes to his feet. He felt the pulses of his temples throb like trip hammers, and it seemed as though his breath was coming from his chest like the roar of a wind from a cavern. It seemed impossible that the horrible sound of this irritated hinge had not shaken the whole house with the shock of an earthquake. The door he pushed had given the alarm. The old man would rise, the two old women would scream, help would come. In a quarter of an hour would be alive with it, and the gendarmes in pursuit. For a moment he thought he was lost. He stood stock still, petrified like the pillar of salt, not daring to stir. Some minutes passed. The door had swung wide open. He ventured to look into the room. Nothing had moved. He listened. Nothing was stirring in the house. The noise of the rusty hinge had wakened nobody. This first danger was over, but still he felt a frightful inner turmoil. Nevertheless, he did not flinch. Not even when he thought he was lost had he flinched. His only thought was to make a quick end of it. With one step, he was in the room. A deep calm filled the bedroom. Here and there, indistinct, confused forms could be distinguished, which by day were papers scattered over a table, open folios, book piles on a stool, an armchair with clothes on it, a prie-dieu, but now were only dark crannies and whitish spots. Jean Valjean advanced, carefully avoiding the furniture. At the far end of the room, he could hear the even, quiet breathing of the sleeping bishop. Suddenly he stopped. He was near the bed. He had reached it sooner than he thought. Sometimes nature mingles her effects and spectacles and our acts with a serious, intelligent appropriateness, as if she wanted us to reflect. For almost half an hour, a great cloud had darkened the sky. At the moment when Jean Valjean paused before the bed, and the cloud broke up as if deliberately, and a ray of moonlight crossed the high window suddenly, lit up the bishop's pale face. He slept peacefully. He was almost completely dressed in bed because of the cold Bas Alps nights, with a dark woolen garment that covered his arms to the wrist. His head was tilted back on the pillow in the unstudied attitude of sleep. Over the side of the bed hung his hand, ornamented with the pastoral ring, and which had done so many good deeds, so many pious acts. His face was lit up with a vague expression of contentment, hope, and happiness. It was more than a smile, and almost a radiance. On his forehead rested the indescribable reflection of an unseen light. The souls of the upright in sleep contemplate a mysterious heaven. A reflection from this heaven shone upon the bishop. But it was also a luminous transparency, for this heaven was within him. It was his conscience. That's a really important quote right there to describe the bishop. At the instant when the moonbeam overlay, so to speak, this inward radiance, the sleeping bishop appeared as if in a halo. But it was mild and veiled in an inexpressible twilight. The moonlight and the moon in the sky, drowsing nature, the garden without a quiver, the quiet house, the hour, the moment, the silence, added something strangely solemn and unutterable to the locks and closed to the venerable repose of this wise man, and enveloped his white locks and closed his eyes with a serene, majestic glory. This face, all hope and confidence, this old man's head, and infant slumber. There was something close to divine in this man, something unconsciously noble. Jean Valjean stood in the shadow with the iron drill in his hand, erect, motionless, terrified by this radiant figure. He had never seen anything like it. This confidence terrified him. The moral world had no spectacle more powerful than this, a troubled, restless conscience on the verge of committing a crime, contemplating the sleep of a just man. to sleep in this isolation with a neighbor such as contained a touch of the sublime which he felt, vaguely but powerfully. No one could have told what was happening inside him, not even himself. To attempt to realize it, the utmost violence must be imagined in the presence of the most extreme mildness. Not even in his face could anything be read with certainty. It was a sort of haggard astonishment. He was looking at it, that was all. But what were his thoughts? It would have been impossible to guess. It was clear that he was moved and overwhelmed, but what was this emotion? He did not take his eyes off the old man. The only thing clearly visible in his attitude and expression was a strange indecision. It was as though he were hesitating between two realms, that of the doomed and that of the saved. He seemed ready either to crack this skull or to kiss this hand. In a few moments he raised his left hand slowly to his forehead and took off his hat. Then, letting his hand fall again slowly, Jean Valjean resumed his meditations, his cap in his left hand, his club in his right, and his hair bristling on the fierce-looking head. Under this frightful gaze, the bishop still slept in profoundest peace. The crucifix above the mantel was dimly visible in the moonlight, apparently extending his arms toward both, with a benediction for one and a pardon for the other. Suddenly Jean Valjean put on his cap, then moved quickly along the bed without looking at the bishop, straight to the cupboard, which he could not make out near its head. That he raised the drill to force the lock. The key was in it. He opened it. The first thing he saw was the basket of silverware. He took it, crossed the room hastily, heedless of noise, reached the door, entered the oratory, took his stick, stepped outside, put the silver in his knapsack, threw away the basket, ran across the yard, leaped over the wall like a tiger, and escaped.